Welcome back to the File X channel. The Colonel Who Shocked Canada, a tragic fall from glory. The military, a place where heroes are forged, individuals who dedicate their youth and even their lives for the peace and security of society. Yet, sometimes, even in the most bizarre tales, it's hard to imagine that someone bearing a prestigious rank, symbolizing the honor of a nation, could conceal under their uniform secrets so dark they send chills down your spine. This time, the story that shook Canada's history introduces us to a figure no less shocking, Colonel Russell Williams, a man who toppled all his glory to become a twisted killer whose crimes reverberated around the globe. Russell Williams, once a name spoken with pride and respect, has now become one that makes all of Canada bow its head in shock. This 47-year-old man, who was once an exceptional pilot and an emblem of Canada's Air Force, carried out vital missions and even flew aircraft carrying Queen Elizabeth II, the Duke of Edinburgh, and the Prime Minister of Canada. Yet, behind these glamorous assignments, he silently descended into a vortex of crime, destroying his own honor and reputation with his own hand. A troubled childhood. The story begins in Bromsgrove, England, where Russell was a young boy. His family immigrated to Canada, carrying hopes of a brighter future. But within just a few years, young Russell faced the divorce of his parents at the tender age of 6. The trauma of losing a complete family seemed to leave an indelible mark on him, despite his outward attempts to rise with an image of resilience. As he entered adulthood, Russell displayed not only intelligence, but also remarkable perseverance. He graduated with distinction from a prestigious university in Toronto, laying the foundation for a career that anyone would envy. In 1987, at the age of 27, Russell officially joined the Canadian Armed Forces. His superiors quickly recognized his potential and enrolled him in the Air Force's flight training program. Here, he was not only a skilled pilot, but also an admired instructor. Russell's career advanced rapidly. By 2009, he became the commander of the Trenton Air Force Base, one of Canada's most critical military facilities. Over his 23 years of service, he participated in historical missions, serving international dignitaries and royalty. The image of a calm, honorable colonel became deeply ingrained in the public's mind. Yet behind that brilliance, who could have guessed that a storm of crimes was brewing in secret? A perfect life, the mask of a monster. Russell was not just successful in his career. He also seemed to have the ideal family life everyone dreams of. He married Elizabeth, a talented woman working in the healthcare industry. They lived in a luxurious home in Ottawa and even purchased a vacation house in the suburbs in 2004. This suburban house became their haven for peaceful weekends, away from the city's hustle. But little did anyone know that this tranquil retreat would turn into the stage for Russell's descent into darkness. Often visiting the house alone during his free time, it was here that a peculiar and perverse habit began to form. At first, it manifested as odd behavior, but over time, it spiraled into unforgivable crimes. Pieces of a tragic puzzle. Canada once took the pride in those who embodied the nation's honor, loyalty, and strength, but no one could have imagined that a military icon would harbor a shadow so ghastly. Colonel Russell Williams, a powerful and respected figure, quietly transformed into a real-life monster. His actions not only left his victims scarred, but also shattered the trust of an entire country. Russell's descent into crime began in 2007. Under the cover of darkness, he stalked young women living near his vacation home in Tweed, Ontario, a place he often visited alone. He meticulously memorized their daily routines, noting when they left for work or returned home. Then, when the houses were vacant, he broke in, leaving no trace behind. Do you think he stole money or valuables? Not at all. Russell's targets were women's underwear and intimate items. Even more disturbingly, he didn't just steal them. He wore them, took photos and videos, and indulged in his perverse pleasures for hours. To understand what drove a man with everything to commit such horrifying acts, we must delve deeper into his psyche and the signs that had been hidden for so long. Was it loneliness, childhood trauma, or perhaps the environment that shaped Russell Williams into the person he became? Let's continue our journey to uncover the secrets of the Colonel who once stood as a symbol but now haunts the pages of Canada's criminal history. The first victim. His first victim was a 12-year-old girl. One fateful day, Russell broke in when the house was empty. He took a pair of pink underwear, put them on, and filmed himself for 3 hours. After being satisfied, he carefully erased all traces, leaving the house as if nothing had ever happened. But that's just the beginning. The feeling of excitement when crossing the legal boundary made this sick habit explode. Russell started breaking into more houses. Some he returned to many times, acting as if there were no rules to stop him. The second victim. In November 2009, Russell drove from his home in Tweed to a residential area about a 30-minute drive away. He sat quietly in his car, observing a house. When the owner, a woman named Anne, left, he began to act. With his expertise, Russell easily broke the lock to open the door. Once inside, he headed straight to Anne's bedroom on the second floor, rummaging through everything. Finally, he found what he was looking for: Anne's underwear and personal items. But that wasn't all. Russell accessed the victim's computer to steal adult videos stored on it. Once done, he left the house in high spirits. This time, he took an unprecedented step, leaving an anonymous letter to threaten her. He typed on her computer, "Feel free to call the police if you like. I'll make all these embarrassing items public for everyone to see. And then let's see if you'll still have the face to live after that." Russell's words showed that his actions were becoming bolder than ever before. They were no longer just about illegal home invasions and theft, but had escalated to threats that could harm the physical, mental, and even emotional well-being of others. Anne returned home late at night after an enjoyable outing with her friends. She felt a chill down her spine upon discovering that her door had been forced open. Summoning all her courage, Anne searched the house for the intruder, but he had long fled. When she reached her bedroom, she was horrified to see everything turned upside down, scattered everywhere. She was even more terrified upon receiving the threat from the mysterious intruder. Anne didn't dare report the incident to the police, but felt unsafe staying in her house. She decided to spend the night at a friend's place. However, Anne didn't know that this too was part of Russell's well-thought-out plan. Anne's decision to leave her home temporarily made it an even easier target for him. Understanding her fear, Russell brazenly returned to her house to continue his depraved acts with her belongings. He stripped off his own clothes, put on Anne's, and confidently posed in front of her mirror, taking photos and videos for hours without any fear that she might return unexpectedly. A few days later, Anne came back to her home, but it was too late. Russell had already gotten what he wanted, leaving Anne unable to accuse him of anything to anyone. The third victim. Just a few days after Anne's ordeal, Jane, a 21-year-old single mother living with her son in Tweed, the same neighborhood where Russell resided, became his next unlucky target. This time, Russell's crime escalated to a new level. He no longer waited for his victims to leave their homes. Instead, he boldly broke in, even when someone was inside. Russell skillfully entered the house without making a sound. To avoid being recognized by Jane, as they lived very close to each other, he wore a mask to conceal his identity. He then silently waited for his prey in her bedroom. At this moment, Jane had just put her son to sleep and returned to her room. The moment she turned on the light, Russell subdued her, covering her eyes and mouth while threatening her. "Do exactly what I say. If you don't stay silent, I'll kill you." Russell deliberately changed his voice to ensure Jane wouldn't recognize him. Although terrified, Jane could only comply with his demands. She begged him not to harm her young son. Of course, Russell wasn't there for the boy. He was there for Jane. He forced her to sit on a chair, tying her with ropes to make it easier to control her. Then Russell made Jane pose provocatively for photos and videos for over 3 hours, leaving the victim in a state of panic and severe psychological trauma. Do you know where Russell went the following morning after committing such heinous acts? He returned as the highly respected colonel in the military, donning his Air Force uniform and proudly wearing his prestigious medals, to attend a charity event for the Criminal Intelligence Agency. It's entirely accurate to say that Russell was living 2 lives simultaneously. By day, he was a refined, honorable man, admired by everyone. But when night fell, he shed that facade to transform into a predator, hunting his vulnerable prey and committing unspeakable acts. Despite his seemingly spotless exterior, Russell's soul had long since rotted away. The fourth victim. "13 days after Jane's ordeal, a woman named Lori called the police to report her case. She recounted that she had been attacked by a mysterious man in her own home. He punched Lori until she lost consciousness, tied her to the sofa, stripped her of all her clothes, and began his depraved acts." Hearing this, the police began connecting the dots and concluded that Lori's case bore striking similarities to other recent reports of assaults, all seemingly carried out in the same manner by the same perpetrator. Yet, at this point, the culprit's identity remained shrouded in mystery. The only detail Lori could provide the police was the sound of his voice. She suspected the attacker might be Larry John, a neighbor living nearby. Immediately, Larry became the target of severe accusations, enduring heavy criticism from everyone, to the point where he could no longer hold his head high in public. Everyone branded Larry a pervert, glaring at him with anger and disgust. Wherever he went, he was ostracized, insulted, and even brutally beaten. An innocent man, unfairly accused, suffered tremendously while the real culprit roamed free, untouched by the law. Ironically, Russell, the true perpetrator, continued to enjoy the trust of the townspeople in Tweed. With his rank as a colonel, he was a figure who inspired reassurance and drew no suspicion whatsoever. The fifth victim. Russell, a cunning manipulator, fooled everyone with his outward appearance and continued to secretly commit these depraved acts, even at his workplace. At the Air Force unit Russell commanded, there was a female officer named Mary, 38 years old, who was a close subordinate of his. The two had worked together on many flights transporting leaders, where Mary was assigned the role of an air hostess. As her direct superior, Russell knew every detail about Mary's life: her phone number, home address, relationships, and work schedule. No detail escaped his notice, especially after he had set his sights on her as his next victim. He would break into her house whenever Mary was away to carry out his usual crimes against women. In November 2009, Mary's life was permanently changed when she noticed that her underwear had gone missing from her closet. Despite checking thoroughly, she could not find them. This occurrence might have seemed odd to Mary, but it wasn't alarming enough for her to report to the police. She thought perhaps they had been misplaced or blown away while drying outside. At the end of November, Mary had a scheduled work trip abroad. Russell saw this as the perfect opportunity to continue his actions without fear of being caught. However, things didn't go as planned. On that day, Mary unexpectedly called in sick without prior notice. Russell went to her house and found her still there, but instead of leaving to keep his secret, he audaciously hid in the basement with a knife in hand, ready to strike. Mary's pet cat, disturbed by the presence of this uninvited guest, kept meowing, drawing Mary's attention. Out of curiosity, she went downstairs to check, not realizing that Russell was waiting with a knife in hand. The moment Mary turned on the light, she was caught off guard and struck repeatedly on the head with a flashlight by Russell, knocking her unconscious. He then proceeded to bind her with duct tape around her face and tie her to a pole, humiliating her. Despite Mary's desperate pleas, he callously watched her slowly die from blood loss, showing no mercy whatsoever. Once she was dead, Russell quickly cleaned up the crime scene and left, disappearing as mysteriously as he had arrived. Hours later, Mary's boyfriend arrived at her house after being unable to contact her and was horrified to find her brutally murdered, lying coldly in the basement. He immediately called the police, and an investigation began. However, all traces had been erased, and the murderer had planned his actions so meticulously that no mistakes were made. After committing the crime, Russell pretended nothing had happened. He even attended Mary's funeral, weeping and offering his condolences to her family. His tears deceived everyone, successfully concealing the crime he had committed. During this time, the police continued to investigate the killer who had taken Mary's life. Even an amateur could tell that this was not the right time for the killer to act, let alone a seasoned criminal like Russell. He lay low, returning to his normal life as a model citizen, always completing his work efficiently and taking care of his family when at home. 2 months later, the case began to fade from the public's attention. The police stopped patrolling the streets as thoroughly, allowing the villain Russell William to re-emerge into the criminal world. The sixth victim. The next victim he targeted was Jessica, 27 years old, who worked in administrative duties and assisted with school bus operations. She lived in an area close to Russell's town of Tweed, which had always been his territory. Russell could never forget the thrill he felt when he took down a victim or when engaging in his depraved acts with lingerie. He was driven by the urge to satisfy that twisted pleasure, and who better to target than young women living alone? But this time, Russell's method of attack changed. He no longer attacked his victim in her home, but instead kidnapped Jessica and took her to another location. The following day, January 29, 2010, Jessica's company tried to contact her after noticing her unusual absence, but all efforts were in vain. They then turned to Jessica's brother for help. Upon receiving the notification, he went with the police to his sister's house to check, but there was no sign of her. The house was in complete disarray, as if a burglary had just occurred. Notably, Jessica's glasses and wallet were found lying on the driveway leading to the garage, making the situation appear increasingly serious. During the investigation, police discovered two important details. First, they found a set of male footprints in the snow in the backyard of the house. The freezing weather had solidified the tracks, making them clearly visible, alongside Jessica's own footprints. The second detail was a strange tire mark, unlike any common tires used in typical family vehicles. From this, it could be concluded that Jessica had been watched from a distance and abducted by an unknown person. Immediately, a large-scale search was launched throughout the town, with all available resources mobilized. Time was critical. The longer they delayed, the more dangerous Jessica's situation became. Even Russell's unit participated along with the townspeople. He put on a perfect act, reassuring everyone that they would be protected because the military was involved. Russell addressed the public. "Our unit will provide the necessary support, and this area is protected by the Canadian Air Force. It's truly tragic to witness such a terrible event." However, despite relentless efforts around the clock, Jessica was never found. While the search continued, local police remained focused on the evidence collected at Jessica's house. Because of the distinct tire tracks, they immediately devised a plan. The police decided to block all entrances and exits of the town, leaving only one access point on Route 37. Any vehicle passing through the checkpoint would be stopped for a thorough inspection. On February 4th, 2010, it was not difficult for the police to find it: the Nissan Pathfinder SUV. Even just a glance was enough for them to recognize that the tire marks matched the ones found at Jessica's house. They exchanged looks of astonishment, silently congratulating themselves for successfully setting the trap. But they had to remain cautious, as revealing too much could cause them to lose the perpetrator. The crucial question was, who was driving the vehicle now? When the car window rolled down, everyone was stunned to recognize the person inside, the respected Colonel Russell Williams, whom they had always held in high regard. But it seemed Russell still didn't understand what was happening. He said, "Can you please check quickly? My son is very sick, and I need to get home to check on him." At his urgent plea, the police had no choice but to let Russell pass through the checkpoint, even though they were filled with doubt. They thought everything would go as planned. But later, the police discovered that Russell had no son at all, and everything he had said was a lie. On February 7th, 2010, Russell was finally summoned for questioning. The person responsible for interrogating him was James Smith, a senior detective from Ontario. His involvement signaled the severity of the case, and it was also due to the fact that Russell was a military colonel, so the responsibility could not be entrusted to local police. Sitting across from James in the interrogation room, Russell showed no signs of fear. On the contrary, he appeared very confident, chewing gum incessantly. However, when the connection between his vehicle's tire marks and those found at the crime scene at Jessica's house was mentioned, he immediately fell silent and quickly confessed. Russell then spent the next 10 hours recounting to James the process of committing his crimes and how his twisted desires had taken hold of his soul, turning him into a killer. Specifically, on the night of January 28, 2010, Russell secretly stalked Jessica from outside her house while she was exercising on a treadmill in the basement. At 1 a.m. the following day, January 29th, he broke into the house while Jessica was sleeping, gagged and blindfolded her, and assaulted her for 3 hours. After satisfying his depraved lust, Russell dragged Jessica into his car and drove her to his home in Tweed. She was still alive at this point and begged for her life. Russell agreed, but in exchange, she had to comply with his demands, which was to let him rape her for the next 21 hours. Once finished, Russell went back on his word and callously killed Jessica without any remorse. He secretly stored her body in his garage, waiting for a time when no one would notice before sneaking into the forest in Tweed to bury her. Russell explained that he decided to confess because he wanted to rid himself of the haunting memories of what he had done and, more importantly, to lessen the burden on his beloved wife. After giving his statement, he left a note for his wife expressing his remorse and asking for her forgiveness, while also asking her to continue taking care of their beloved cat they had kept all this time. Surprisingly, the case file was quickly completed in less than 24 hours after Russell's arrest. Upon searching his homes in Tweed and Ottawa, police found numerous notes, photographs, and other evidence proving that Russell Williams was the perpetrator of the previous attacks. Twice he had burned his stolen lingerie collection in a field near Ottawa. But what remained was more than enough to convict him, including photos of the bedroom of two 11-year-old twin girls and 87 stolen pairs of lingerie from a teenage girl living alone. Additionally, his computer contained many files of images and videos showing the rape of his victims. The police also noticed one particular file containing detailed information about Russell's crime plans. He had meticulously recorded the dates, times of the crimes, the victims, what he stole, and where. All of it exactly like a criminal diary. In April 2010, Lieutenant Colonel John Williams began handling the case of this depraved Air Force colonel. Many people in the military court who were directly involved in the case heard rumors that their own homes were among those that Russell Williams had confessed to breaking into. Also in that month, Russell attempted to commit suicide in prison by shoving a piece of cardboard down his throat in an attempt to suffocate, but he failed. Afterward, his cell was placed under special surveillance. On July 23, 2010, Russell was brought to trial at the Ontario Superior Court in Belleville, Canada. On October 18, 2010, during the trial in Belleville, Colonel Russell Williams was found guilty of 2 murders, 2 sexual assaults, and 82 break-ins. The prosecution presented evidence including many photos Williams had taken of his victims being tortured, as well as photos of himself wearing the victim's lingerie in a state of extreme arousal. In some of the photos, he wore underwear with cartoon characters, while in others, he was photographed close-up, wearing silk lingerie in a highly excited state. The prosecution briefly described a video he had filmed himself, but chose not to show it in court because it was too depraved and violent. On October 21, 2010, Russell was sentenced to life in prison for the murders and an additional 120 years for other offenses. Even after this verdict, Russell showed no signs of remorse or apology to his victims. The judge ordered the destruction of the defendant's SUV and all the records he had kept, as well as the hundreds of stolen pieces of lingerie. The court also fined Williams $8,800 Canadian dollars, $100 for each crime, to be paid into a fund for the victims. When the media reported on Williams's case, many Canadian citizens called for his execution, a penalty that had been abolished in Canada since 1976. Currently, Williams is being held in a high-security prison in Kingston, Ontario. However, he could still be eligible for parole in 2035 at the age of 72. Despite the horrific crimes, some experts argue that Russell cannot be classified as a serial killer. According to FBI standards and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, a serial killer is defined as someone who commits 3 or more murders in a specific cycle. So, If Russell had not been caught after Jessica's case and remained free, would he have continued his crimes and caused even more horror? Furthermore, experts analyzing this case say that it was unprecedented, calling him a new kind of master, as no one had succeeded like he did, holding a respected position in society and developing his twisted tendencies into serial murder within just 2 years. Russell's wife, Elizabeth, was absent from the trial, but the crimes of her husband had made her life increasingly burdensome. In addition to learning that the husband she had lived with for 20 years was a woman's lingerie thief, a killer of 2 people, and an attacker of 2 others, Elizabeth was also faced with a lawsuit. One of Williams's victims, who was fortunate enough to survive, filed a lawsuit against both Russell and his wife, demanding compensation of $2.45 million Canadian dollars. She not only wanted Williams to compensate for the crime and the emotional harm caused to her, but also accused them of transferring assets illegally to avoid potential future financial judgments. Shortly after Russell's arrest, he and his wife had divided the assets, with the cheap house in Tweed going to Williams, while Elizabeth agreed to pay her husband $62,000, his share of the more expensive house on the street. After this case, the Canadian military immediately stripped Russell Williams of his military rank. In a special ceremony, 4 soldiers burned the criminal's uniform and medals. He was the first officer in Canada to be subjected to such a symbolic punishment. However, he would still receive a pension because Canadian law does not strip this right, as there had never been a similar case in Canada, so there was no legal basis to cancel his pension. This fact was made public through the media, causing a public outcry. Eventually, the government agreed to pass a federal bill to revoke pensions in such cases. From Russell Williams' case, we must seriously reflect on human ethics. Not everyone who appears respectable on the outside has a kind heart. Sometimes, that's just what they want to show us, while the mysterious life behind it might be filled with things you could never imagine.